Howdy folks, hope you're all having a good one, and welcome to another episode of Mingles with Jingles. So, it's quite a good time to be a gamer lately. We've had Baldur's Gate 3, we've had Aliens Dark Descent, we've had Dredge, we've had the System Shock remake, we've had Elden Ring. I mean, it wasn't really my cup of tea, but it was an undeniably great game. And we've got Starfield coming out in just over a week. Well, if you've pre-ordered it, please don't pre-order it. Just at least wait for the day one reviews. I mean, I know it looks good. Fallout 76 looked good until people started playing it. This is Bethesda after all. Ironically, do you know what Bethesda announced before they announced Starfield back at E3 in 2018? Elder Scrolls 6. And then they did the Starfield announcement right after that, and more people were excited about Elder Scrolls 6 than Starfield, but here we are 5 years later, and where's Elder Scrolls 6? The only thing that we know about it is that it was announced at E3 in 2018, but Starfield is here. And I have to admit, I like this. You notice they're not mentioning Fallout 76 here. 25 years in the making. Yeah, I think that's stretching the truth just a tiny little bit. Don't get me wrong, I am very cautiously excited and optimistic about Starfield, because it does look good. Although, only if you don't look too closely. I mean, you realise they're still using the creation engine. And you can't really tell, because it's obviously a heavily modded version of the creation engine, but it doesn't really look any better than my heavily modded version of Fallout 4. And my heavily modded version of Fallout 4 has character models that look better than these. You can really tell that they're pushing this engine to its limits when you take a close look at the character models, especially their faces. I mean, it by no means looks bad. It actually looks really, really good, but, well, you can kind of tell that they're still using an updated version of the same game engine that they've been using since 2011. But it's amazing what they have managed to do with that game engine. But then again, it's equally amazing what modders have managed to do with the previous version of the game engine in Fallout 4. In fact, when this is finished running, I'll show you my version of Fallout 4. Don't ask me what mods I'm running. Dozens. I can't even remember what they are. I don't even have the mod manager installed. Although the game runs fine without it once you've installed the various different mods that you want. But it looks pretty good. It's amazing what the community have done. It's pretty much on par with what Bethesda themselves have done with this version 2 of their creation engine. And Starfield is the first game from Bethesda that uses Creation Engine 2, which is an update of the original creation engine all the way back from 2011. So I'm, cautiously optimistic about Starfield. I'm certainly not pre-ordering it because I've been burned before. Oh, what was it? I saw a quote. It was from whoever was publishing From Software's new game. From Software, of course, the creators of Elden Ring, which was an amazingly good game. Like I said, I've never played it. It just wasn't really my cup of tea. But I have yet to hear anybody saying a bad thing about Elden Ring. And the publisher was saying, you can pre-order with confidence whatever game From Software are doing next, because these are the guys who brought you Elden Ring, and that's a guarantee of quality. There is no such thing, not in this industry. BioWare had never put a foot wrong until Mass Effect Andromeda and Anthem, and you could argue the last 15 minutes of Mass Effect 3. Blizzard were a name that you could trust until they very suddenly weren't. And then, of course, you've got Bethesda themselves with Fallout 76, which was such a disaster on every level imaginable that people actually stopped talking about the train wreck that was Star Wars Battlefront 2. Electronic Arts, proud holders of the title of most downvoted post in Reddit's history, could actually turn around and look at Fallout 76 and say, well, I guess Battlefront 2 wasn't that bad. And the thing is, I mean, I love Bethesda games. I'm not a huge fan of the company that make them, but the games themselves. Actually, you know, my displeasure with Bethesda is almost entirely due to Fallout 76. The thing about Bethesda titles is nobody expects them to be bug-free anymore. And yeah, I mean, sure, every game that comes out has some bugs on launch. Baldur's Gate wasn't bug-free. I mean, it was largely bug-free, and there weren't any game-breaking bugs, but it wasn't 100% perfect. But just 70% perfect is a pretty high standard for a Bethesda release, and yet we're quite prepared, at least until Fallout 76 came out, quite prepared to forgive games like Fallout 4, the problems that it had on launch and still has today. Problems that it inherited from Fallout 3 that still hadn't been fixed by the time Fallout 4 came out, and still hadn't been fixed and introduced a hell of a lot more for Fallout 76, because, and this was the reason, or one of the reasons, there were many, why Fallout 76 was such an unmitigated dumpster fire. Because we were prepared to forgive Bethesda for their janky animations and their ropey character models and the missions that didn't work properly and all the things that were wrong with Bethesda games, because the stories and the writing and the characters were so very, very good. And so when it came to doing Fallout 76, it's almost like they had this meeting and thought, right, what is it that everybody likes about our games? Oh yeah, the story and the writing and the characters. Right, so we'll cut all of that out. We'll cut out all of the stuff that we do well, all of the stuff that people say, well, yeah, okay, everything else about it is a massive jank fest, but this is really, really good. All of that stuff we'll leave on the cutting room floor so that there's nothing left but the jank fest. Yeah, that's what people want. And nobody saw that coming? Really? I don't know how much Todd Howard earns, but his shareholders should be asking for a refund. Yeah, but, you know, I mean, I don't think Todd Howard's actually that bad. For those of you who aren't aware of who Todd Howard is, he's the game director at Bethesda. He's the guy that gets rolled out onto the stage at E3 to give all the presentations on their upcoming games. And he's not actually that bad. I mean, he's not Randy Pitchford. Todd's taken massive amounts of, well, deservedly so, massive amounts of shit over the years. Mostly for Fallout 76. And he 100% deserved it because, I mean, have you played Fallout 76? Or tried to? It's been a couple of years now, of course. Apparently the game now works mostly, or at least to the same kind of level that other Bethesda games like Fallout 4 do. In other words, you know, they're still buggy, but you can at least play them. And when Todd Howard was talking up Fallout 76 prior to its launch, I don't think he came out with any outright lies. I mean, feel free to correct me in the comments, but I don't think there were any deliberate intentions or attempts to mislead the customers. Aside from they knew that it was broken as all hell and still went ahead and released it. So I'm not trying to, you know, excuse them for that. But at least there were no deliberate attempts to shortchange the audience. I mean, you could argue that they were, and you'd probably be right, but I mean in the way that somebody like Randy Pitchford from Gearbox just outright lied, presenting deliberately misleading demonstrations of what Aliens Colonial Marines was going to be like when it was released, and the difference between what was shown and what was actually released, it was like they were playing two different games. And then, of course, he doubled down on his bullshit as well, refused to apologise for it, and insisted that they'd done nothing wrong. Randy Pitchford really is a special kind of toxic arsehole. How the hell he's still in charge of Gearbox, I have no idea. But then again, what exactly have Gearbox done in the last couple of years? Because I think Gearbox had a fairly promising start, although they were working on other people's titles. Like, they did expansion packs for Valve's Half-Life, and a couple of ports for other game systems. And their first actual own title, well, we're going back a while now, Brothers in Arms, Road to Hill 30, was a World War II thing. And it did pretty well. It was a fairly well-received game. It, as far as I can remember, mostly worked. You know, there were no major bugs with it. What they promised was exactly what you got. And then, of course, Borderlands and Borderlands 2, both of which were amazing. But they were a long time ago. I mean, they didn't do Borderlands 3. I can't remember. I think Borderlands 2 is 11 years old now. But this is the sort of thing that tends to happen with these developers. They have a couple of major successes, Borderlands 1 and 2 being the obvious examples, and then they start thinking, well, that's it, we can do no wrong. Or possibly their publisher starts thinking, well, that's it, we can do no wrong. So let's just get the next thing out the door quick. And the next thing out the door, well, it wasn't quick. It was Duke Nukem Forever. To be completely fair to Gearbox here, because if you're not familiar with the history of Duke Nukem Forever, I think that thing was in development hell for about 15 years. When it was owned by 3D Realms, who did the original Duke Nukem games. But then Gearbox negotiated some kind of deal where they took the original employees and founded a new studio. I think it was called Triptych, but it was all based at Gearbox. And then they finished the game and published it. Oh boy, it was bad. I mean, it made Fallout 76 look pretty decent. I mean, it all kind of worked. I mean, it wasn't riddled with the kind of bugs that Fallout 76 had that effectively made it unplayable for up to a year after release. I mean, Duke Nukem Forever worked. It was just shit. It was infantile. I mean, Duke Nukem had always had that kind of sense of humour. Real schoolboy humour with fart jokes, and you know, it was not sophisticated entertainment by any stretch of the imagination. And yet somehow Gearbox managed to take a game series that had the kind of sense of humour that would only really entertain a 12-year-old and dumbed it down. It was a disaster. So they've had these massive successes with Borderlands and Borderlands 2, which were and still are both amazing games. Well written, well scripted, the plots, the pacing, the shooting, everything about the Borderlands games was top notch. And they followed that up with the raging dumpster fire that was Duke Nukem Forever. Followed itself by the not quite raging dumpster fire, but still a dumpster fire, that was Aliens Colonial Marines. Now don't get me wrong, I mostly enjoyed Aliens Colonial Marines. And I think I mostly enjoyed it for two reasons. One, it's Aliens. And, you know, I'm prepared to cut anything, a fair amount of slack, if it's Aliens, because I'm a massive fanboy. And also because it, as a co-op shooter, it was pretty good. And I'd already played through it once, and then Rita had never played it, so I played through it again in co-op with her. And it was a lot of fun playing with another, you know, friend. But there were undeniable problems. Not just the stuff that was presented at the trade shows, promoting the game, bore very little resemblance to what was actually released. So much so, in fact, that Gearbox was sued. Well, actually, their publisher was sued. Gearbox were dropped as a plaintiff from the lawsuit, and the publisher had to settle, I think, for $1.25 million. Because the stuff that they were showing off, saying, yeah, this is Alien Colonial Marines, was not what got published. I mean, it bore some resemblance because they were Colonial Marines and Aliens, but other than that, it was like two different games. The AI of the aliens was so abysmally bad. And the funny thing was, it wasn't until years later that they found out that you could fix the AI so that the aliens actually behaved intelligently by correcting one typo in a text file that governed the aliens' behaviour. It was that simple, but Gearbox had missed it. So you had like ludicrously bad alien AI. You had graphics that definitely weren't what had been advertised. I mean, they weren't bad graphics, but they weren't particularly good even by the standards of the time the game was released. And I've since reinstalled it and gone back and thought, well, maybe it'll look better with high... Nope. No, it's still pixelated as all hell. It doesn't upscale very well at all on a modern PC. But there were other things that I really couldn't forgive them for about Aliens Colonial Marines. I mean, I could forgive them that the alien AI was a bit shit. Well, it was very shit. I could forgive them that the graphics were barely current generation at the time the game was released. But what I couldn't forgive them for were the liberties that they took with the plot and the lore around Aliens. I suppose I'll try to keep this spoiler free, but to explain exactly what happened to the Sulaco at the end of the 1986 Aliens movie, when Ripley, Newt and Hicks and what's left of Bishop go into hypersleep. It was insultingly stupid. Right. I'll not give you any spoilers, but trust me. Speaking as a massive Aliens nerd, when I got to the point in Aliens Colonial Marines where they gave you the big reveal to explain everything, it was like I could physically feel my intelligence lowering with every word that came out of the on-screen characters' mouths. It was insultingly stupid. So, yeah. They hadn't been doing very well, Gearbox. Had two disasters, one after the other, one of which ended up getting them sued. So what happened next? Where do they go from here? Well, what happened next, I do kind of feel sorry for them. I have a certain amount of sympathy for Gearbox because their next title was called Battleborn. You may have heard of it. It was a multiplayer online battle arena game, a MOBA. And it wasn't bad. I actually played it, and I didn't love it, but I certainly didn't hate it, and it was pretty well received by critics, and initially at least sold reasonably well. And then a month later, Overwatch came out. Yeah. Originally, Battleborn was I think it was a subscription-based title. And within a year, it had gone free to play. And that's usually the death knell for any kind of online game. Just look at Star Wars The Old Republic. When that thing went free to play, it basically died. And they shut it down completely 2 years ago. And they basically haven't done anything since. Aside from remastering Homeworld, I think, and announcing the development of Homeworld 3. But that's it. They've basically done nothing since Battleborn. But while I have a certain amount of sympathy for, what happened to Battleborn, because it wasn't a bad game, it just had the massive misfortune to come out within a month of Overwatch. But I can never forgive Gearbox in general, or Randy Pitchford in particular, for what happened to Obsidian Entertainment as a result of Gearbox's Aliens Colonial Marines. You see, Sega, who owned the rights to the Aliens license, they had two Aliens projects in development at the time. One was Gearbox and Aliens Colonial Marines, and the other was an Aliens role-playing game in development from the masters of role-playing games, Obsidian Entertainment. Obsidian's another one of those companies that just never seems to be able to catch a break. They're constantly having projects cut out from underneath them by their publisher. And they've never done anything bad. But we could have had an Aliens role-playing game, and Sega chose to pull the budget from Obsidian and give it to Gearbox. And what did Gearbox do with that money? Aliens Colonial Marines. Because that game was released, we never got the Aliens role-playing game from Obsidian Entertainment. Can you imagine how good that could have been? I mean, I say could have been. I know, I'm always on record as saying, never trust them until it's out. Don't pre-order. Don't give them their money until you've at least read the day one reviews. There's no such thing as a guarantee of quality in this business. But, I mean, Obsidian Entertainment have literally never made a bad game. I mean, Obsidian brought us Baldur's Gate. Baldur's Gate 2. Planescape Torment. Arguably the best computer role-playing game ever made, and they were going to do an Aliens role-playing game. I think it was called Aliens Crucible. And Sega took the budget away from that, gave it to Gearbox, and Gearbox gave us Aliens Colonial Marines. Shit! And of course, none of this is helped by the fact that Gearbox's CEO, Randy Pitchford, is an arsehole of legendary proportions. In the dumpster fire that erupted after the release of Aliens Colonial Marines, Randy Pitchford just doubled down on all the lies and bullshit that he'd been spinning about the game prior to release. He refused to take any kind of accountability. He insisted that Gearbox had done nothing wrong. He would block anybody who tried to hold him to any kind of accountability standard. He would refuse to give interviews or even answer questions from any source that was even mildly critical of the game. And after Gearbox had managed to wriggle their way out of the class action lawsuit that the game was slapped with, leaving the publisher holding the bag, which honestly I don't really have any sympathy for whatsoever, but Pitchford then went on to smugly brag about how they'd managed to get away with it. I'm not making any of this up, by the way. He actually, without the slightest shred of irony, tried to portray himself as the victim, standing up for the little guy in the dumpster fire surrounding the release of his own game. You know, instead of actually acknowledging his own horseshit in the way that, and while I will never have a good thing to say about Fallout 76, but Todd Howard did at least put his hands up and say, yeah, we really fucked up on this one. Many, many times, but not Randy Pitchford. And then, of course, there's the time he was caught with a USB stick that was alleged to have child pornography on it. He denies it was child pornography. He doesn't deny that it was pornography. Now, I'm not here to judge. You all know what I mean here. But the excuse that he came out with... I mean, he's an American. Pornography is not illegal in America. But he tried to... You're not going to... I'm not making this one up either, right? This is 100% true. He said that it wasn't child pornography, and the woman performing the sex act in the video on the USB stick was only there because the act she was performing was very similar to a magic trick that he was researching. So it was for research purposes. This is the kind of bullshit that we're dealing with every time Randy Pitchford opens his mouth. I still feel bad for Obsidian Entertainment, though. I mean, they've never done anything bad. They've certainly never done anything wrong. And yet, they never seem to be able to catch a break. I mean, Baldur's Gate 2, Tales of the Sword Coast, Planescape Torment. These were the guys who stepped outside of their comfort zone, which traditionally has always been role-playing games, and tried to give us Armoured Warfare, or at least their version of what Armoured Warfare was going to be. And then their publisher sacked them because they just wanted it to be more like World of Tanks. And they tried to do something genuinely new and interesting with a tank battle game. They didn't just want to push out a World of Tanks clone, because you're never going to beat World of Tanks at being World of Tanks. So they tried to do something different, but the publisher didn't like that, because the publisher... I mean, I have no illusions that the publisher thought they were ever going to out World of Tanks, but all the publisher really wanted was a slice of the World of Tanks money pie. And that meant making a game that was just like World of Tanks. So of course Obsidian wanted to try to do something that was actually interesting, and the publisher sacked them. And then moved development in-house so they could just finish doing a World of Tanks clone, except, and I know this is hard to say because this is World of Tanks we're talking about, not as good. So, yeah. But the publisher did what it set out to do. It got itself just the tiniest little slice of that World of Tanks money pie. That's all they were interested in. They weren't interested in trying to add anything fresh to the genre. They just wanted their slice of that pie, and that's what they got. Oh, Obsidian did the first South Park game as well, didn't they? The Stick of Truth. It's another one of the greatest games ever made. I laughed myself sick playing that game. I feel so sorry for Obsidian Entertainment. I mean, the amount of stuff that they've had cancelled that could have been genuinely amazing. I mean, you know, no disrespect to Larian Entertainment, because they've had a massive success, and deservedly so, with Baldur's Gate 3. But Obsidian was supposed to do Baldur's Gate 3 shortly after the massive success of Baldur's Gate 2. And I'm sure it would have been amazing, but, well, there was no money for it, and so the whole thing got shit-canned. And that is the story of Obsidian Entertainment's life. That's the world we live in, I guess. I mean, you've got companies like Obsidian Entertainment who genuinely try to make the best games they possibly can, who port their heart and their passion into everything that they do. They get projects cancelled on them left, right and centre, but they still somehow manage to find the resources and the funds to struggle on and continue pushing out fantastic titles. And then you've got twats like Randy Pitchford, whose company hasn't done anything good in 10 years, who's directly responsible for two of the gaming world's greatest disappointments, Duke Nukem Forever and Aliens Colonial Marines, has never once apologised for his part in any of it. The exact opposite, in fact, continues to double down and deny any kind of wrongdoing or accept any kind of responsibility, and who 2 years ago was awarded the title by Tech Titans CEO of the Year. And Gearbox, his company, who basically to all intents and purposes haven't done shit for the last 10 years, received the award Corporate Innovation of the Year. Meanwhile, Obsidian Entertainment, oh god, stop the world, I want to get off. Well, anyway, wow, that was a depressing episode, wasn't it? Nevertheless, I hope it's given you something to think about and maybe talk about in the comments. I'm sure there are things that I've gotten wrong. And by the way, I'm not really trying to defend Todd Howard here, because, I mean, he did get up on stage and lie to us multiple times, but he has at least apologised for it. I mean, you have to understand, when we're comparing people like Todd Howard and Randy Pitchford, Todd Howard actually looks good. Right. That was the point of the comparison. Anyway, that's it for today. Looking forward to Starfield. Definitely not pre-ordering it though. It's Bethesda. I've been burned before, and you shouldn't pre-order it too. Although I suppose at this point it's probably too late. If you're going to do it, you've probably already done it. So hey, fingers crossed. Let's hope it's nothing like Fallout 76. I mean, I'm sure it won't be, because it's single player, isn't it? You know, and single player is what Bethesda is actually pretty good at. Hopefully they've remembered that this time around. But I'm still not pre-ordering it. I'll wait. I'll see the day one reviews at least, and I highly encourage everybody else to do the same. Stop giving them your money until you've seen what they're offering. Anyway, that's it. Hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're all going to have an amazing week. Let's face it, the likelihood is that you won't, but I hope you are. And as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.